topic for this week is it's just business. And my ideas is, do ethics change when it comes to being in the workplace? Does a decision to do something right and wrong, does that change when we're making a decision that benefits our business or our job or our career? And I thought I'd start this with a bit of a story of what happened to me in the past. The story has to do with, I got introduced to a client, a very large client. It was introduced by a partner who was working as a consultant for them. After we had them on board for a few months, he came to me and said, well, I'd like to send you more work. Can we organize that you pay me a commission, like headhunting fee or whatever? And I said, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's kind of normal in business. I don't really like it, but I said, I'll do it. And he's like, and then I got another reply, would you do it for the one I already gave you? And I'm like, well, that's already been priced, that's already been set up, but I'm happy to do it for future ones. 2 weeks later, he introduced someone else to them as a client, had them pitch to him, and they moved across to him because he now got that referral. He said to me, it's just business. You know, I got to look after myself. And I thought that was a bit of a dog move. Now, I also actually had a chat with that client where they said, listen, the guy blew us away. You're a really nice guy. We trust you. But like, these guys really sold us some great stuff and we love it. You know, you're a nice guy, but you know, at the end of the day, you know where nice guys finish. And I thought it was very interesting because I always get the nice guy comment. I don't believe nice guys finish last personally, because in the end, I did get those clients back in 6 months when they found out that people were trash. So I'm of the opinion that there is still a place where you have work and business, where it is just business, and where you actually do have to show ethics. So I thought I'd put out to you guys is, where do you think the line is between personal ethics and business ethics?
I don't think there is a line. I think if you're authentic in yourself and you have values that you live by, how you behave, you know, at the boardroom table is how you should behave at the dinner table. You know, you're either real or you're not real. And I think, you know, the other thing about business ethics is that if people, you know, you have nothing but your reputation. And so independent of, you know, winning a deal or not winning a deal, if people can't trust you long term, you're pretty much done in business anyway.
I find it fascinating, the fact that for me, because I've had lots of people that have come back later saying, well, can we get a commission for doing an introduction of an investor or whatever? So if you lay the ground rules from the beginning and you understand who's adding value to what part of the relationship and get that right, it saves a lot of this sort of, well, it's going behind the scenes and doing just business. And you can form a contract with someone, which if that's in place and then they go and do it's just business, well then, you know, that to me, that's different than just, you know, someone saying after the fact, oh, look, you know, I did this thing. Can I get something for that? So I think, you know, for me, it's always a really good practice to be very transparent about when you're entering into some sort of arrangement with someone, understanding where the value lies and not taking for granted the value that someone else brings, and just sort of just cementing that up front, because it just saves pain downstream of expectations around, oh, well, I gave you that, but you didn't give me that. No, that wasn't as much as what I thought, or that this concept of expectations, if that's not cemented really clearly at the beginning, it can be misconstrued for ethics, I think, you know, like, but obviously there are people that go and do the wrong thing, but there is, I think, a sliding scope between what people's expectations are because they're not cemented, and the difference in expectations is then mixed up between ethics.
I think also
the number of times.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, go ahead, Tia. Go.
Just the number of times that I've actually had contracts in place. I've had, you know, I've just make a very simple sort of Google form, have everybody fill it out. And then at the end, you know, it's sort of like, it's there, it's on the side. I don't really need to go back to it. But if I do, there is a contract in place, right? So the Google form becomes a contract because you've already fulfilled all of the questions that I've asked you. Now, at the, you know, an experience that happened last year in Mexico, the client had agreed that this is what they were going to do. Now, fast forward about 4 months or so, and the event is just about to happen. Like, we're probably about a week or 2 weeks before the event, and they'd given me a list of the things that they were going to do, and that it was going to be their responsibility, and they'd put a budget towards it. 2 weeks before, and I'm wondering, well, you know, nothing's happened yet. Did you want me to do something about this? And they're like, what do you mean? Didn't agree to doing that. And I was like, wow, like, for a moment, being the good person, I was like, oh my God, wow, I'm really sorry. Let me just double check. And of course, in a situation like that, I would just apologize and just sort it out myself. But I went back to the contract. I looked through the contract and then confirmed that actually they'd agreed to that. So why was it that they were going to lie about it? And so they'd actually lied about it. And it made me realize just how much having a contract in place, like you say, Finn, is like your backup plan, that when time gets rough, and especially when there are two different standards in business, that you can actually take the integrity out of the situation and say, look, this is what I believe in, because it's based on what we've determined before.
Tia, did you have, with that, in that scenario, that contract came together, you did the show, it went successfully, and did you ever do work with them again after that?
No.
So
and
I look at it and I agree with both Ben and yourself that, a contract's really important. But I do a lot of my work on a handshake. And I agree that this is what's
But that's a contract.
Well, yeah, I guess it is, Finn. You're correct. But we have an agreement where, yep. And if they don't go down that track, or they don't pay for the work, or they do that, or Tony, as you pointed out, the guy turns around and wanted more money, and he turned around to you and actually said, good guys finish last. You're picking your tribe. You're picking your group of people that you want to work with. It might not be right. That they came back to you was because they didn't believe that. They actually needed the work to be done. I have found most times when you look at somebody in their eye and they agree to do something and they go ahead, it's in your best interest to do it, and it's in their best interest. You're always going to find 5% of people that are going to screw you. You don't need to change your ethics and your style because somebody has. But I do see a lot of people trying to put a whole bunch of things together to try and mitigate every circumstance, where if you want to work with good people and those good people want to work with you, you'll find each other do great business. You can get really caught up and the mic happens and it stops really good work happening.
But hang on, like, good guys finish last. What is a good guy?
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
So if I have a whole bunch of staff that are taking a wage and they're providing value to me and I'm looking after them, it's up to me to make sure the expectations are very clear about what the relationships are and everyone understands that, because that's me being a good guy to the people that I'm employing, to my investors. So it's not just a good guy is someone who's just this happy-go-lucky. There's a certain level of responsibility you're carrying, and for me, it's all about communication and making sure everyone's very clear and it's documented and it's simple and it's checked in regularly, because then that saves this sort of, oh, well, you said this and I said that and my expectation was to get this and I've added more value. It's like, because it gets further and further apart,
Yeah.
The other thing is, I just want to add to that, maybe just an extension to what Adam and Matt were saying, is that I actually think that we have forgotten about the currency of having a circle of influence that you can trust. And you know what? Sometimes it just doesn't work out the way you want it to work out in the short term. But why have we forgotten about the notion of building long-term relationships and adding value in that circle of influence based on trust? And, yes, contracts are important. Yes, whatever a handshake, whatever that contractual agreement or that communication, as you say, Finn, whatever we lay out as this is what I'm willing to give and this is what you're willing to accept. Outside of that, there are two human beings, and humans today, I believe, we need to be way more interested in the currency in our circle of influence or the collaborations that we establish, rather than what's in it for me short term. To me, that is such a worker mindset. It's all about scarcity. It's like, what can I get right now? Instead of saying, hey, it's not going to work out for me this time, but you know what? Next time it might be even better. That's where I see that the glue between the communication and the contract.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mary. I think
the hardest part is transparency.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, Mary. I think that's absolutely right. And I think that is particularly the case when, because we're talking about really transactional ethical challenges here. So, the issue is, did you do what you said you were going to do? Am I getting paid what I thought I was going to get paid? But I think sometimes when you talk about business and ethics, there are much larger topics about what kind of clients you'll take and what kind of clients you won't. Where do you draw the line about where the business need intersects with your own personal boundaries? So, I recall a time I worked for a large educational institution, not the one I work for now. At the time, a deal was brought to us from a very questionable government regime to do some training of government officials that would have been in a security environment. And that regime does not have the best reputation in terms of the way it deals with its citizens. And it was one of the first deals that crossed my desk when I had started there. So it was really a test for me of the people that I was working with. And so I looked at that deal, and it was a hell of a lot of money. It was millions and millions of dollars, and put it to the rest of the team and sort of said, look, here's an opportunity. I'm curious to know what you think about this. You know, is this the kind of project that we should be doing or not? And thankfully, you know, to a person, every single person said, no, the money's just not worth it. That's not the business that we're in. We're not prepared to cross that line, because once we teach these people how to, have the skills, we don't know how they're going to deploy them, and we don't know that the skills that we've taught them aren't going to be used in a negative way. And I think that, they're the questions of ethics. That's like, do you work with tobacco companies? Do you work with firearm companies? Do you work with mining companies? Everybody has their own line and their own perspective.
And that's why values are really critical in that scenario. And we haven't even put currency in that. To me, values are the benchmark. You either align with my values or you don't align with my values. Mm-hmm. And I always say that if somebody doesn't align with my values, example, a client, that client becomes a client from hell, literally, and I've experienced this time and time again. And it's just a benchmark. It's all it is. It's just saying, this is what I believe in. If you're kind of not in that space, it's not going to work out for us.
But I see this is more than just like clients. This is like, we've seen large companies, probably the ones that probably do the worst things, where you see mass layoffs from a company that is the most profitable one in the industry. Not even like the one that's going downhill and they don't cut people. They're going to be screwed and lose their stock price. I'm talking about like the most profitable companies in the world. They will cut people because that's more profitable. And
but Tone, I don't know. Tone, I don't know if that's a question of ethics, though, because I think that's the reality of the way that, don't get me wrong, I think it's unethical, but I think that is the system that we're in. We're in a system that rewards executives for protecting shareholders above staff. And so that's what you do. You're never going to get criticized as a senior executive for making more money for shareholders. That's the system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's what, not just big companies, like obviously that if you're a publicly listed company, you're almost screwed to have ethics. I don't know many that can, because it's the people buying your stock.
We definitely have like global reporting standards, right?
Yeah, but you have
like if you've got like ISO or anything like that.
Yeah, you have companies trading on that. You have like Google, you have Facebook. These companies turn out and say, we'll only do good work, we'll only do good things. And yet you go into China and you'll change your mindset, or you won't allow those things.
But guys, there are ethics. Right? Any listed company has regulatory processes that they have to meet. So depends what you call ethics, right? And that's another discussion. But, I think we started a conversation around someone that was saying, it's just business. And I think we're getting into a very deep discussion. I totally agree with everything everyone's saying. But, there are, depending on what you call ethics, every ASX listed company has a bunch of regulatory processes which they have to meet for reporting standards, for governance standards. But it depends what you call ethics.
That doesn't mean that they're not going to have below the table sort of like deals. And I've seen a number of these circumstances globally, right? Like
I agree,
some of the projects that I've seen, it's like, how the hell are you at the table? No, like really, how the hell did you get here?
But I don't think that's different to a lot of organizations in the world. It's like there seems to be.
But that doesn't mean that it's acceptable.
By who? If you're reporting to shareholders and you have a tax haven and you're reporting all your earnings depending again who's what are the value that to Adam's point, if the system is set up to protect shareholder value, and their job of the organization is to do that above looking after the ethics of people, well then is that the right thing to do?
I think the question is about like, where do you put a stake in the ground and say no?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
I totally agree.
If you saw the news today, literally, I was having lunch and watching the news before I came up to do this. And, the lead story on the news is that News Corp is about to close a whole lot of rural newspapers, and about another, 1,500 or 2,000 people will be out of work. Their share price went up 2.4% this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, on that story, there was a counterpoint on that where recently the first newspaper that's open in Australia in how many years has just popped up, and they're setting out papers overworked because they're ethically driven. They're only doing local news, and they're giving the people what they want. So you can look at two points on this. One is ethically, I'm looking after shareholders, but are you? Are you doing what you're best to do, which is actually drive the company and make more money, or look at cuts to actually reduce what you're doing and bring out a worse product?
But to your point, Matt, like that spawns innovation through them acting that way. Over time, people have had enough, and history is a great repeater of different events that have happened, and people have birthed innovation movements, all sorts of things because of that behavior.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
sometimes it's a good thing.
Oh, look, I totally do. At the moment, if you were in Rome at a certain time, it would have been great. At the end of that, probably you didn't want to be there. I mean, like with most great companies, they get to a point where they eat themselves or they lose that innovation point. You look at companies like GE.
One of my favorite stories, when I was 17, I went to the Vatican, okay? And I walked around the Vatican. I went on a tour, which is unlike me. I don't normally do tours, but I went on a tour because it was English speaking. And I'm walking around, and we went to the Egypt section, and they're showing basically Egypt. And I put my hand up and they said, yes. And I said, can someone tell me why this isn't a museum of rape? And they went, oh my God. And I went, well, basically you're showing me all this stuff you've stolen from around the world. And one of the Bible things is thou shalt not steal. And you're charging me to go and see this stuff you've stolen. Like, I don't get it. And like, it's quite fascinating. My whole life, there's these sort of big iconic things that are saying one thing and doing another. And it's like, and people aren't questioning it, but I think now people are questioning it a lot more.
People don't ask pragmatic questions, Finn. They can't think for themselves because we've been taught how to, somebody else is thinking for us. So maybe that's the connection to ethics, that, it's kind of like this hamster wheel. We just go, oh, well, what's in it for me? Quick, scarcity, got to grab while it's hot, and then I can move on. But don't worry about who it impacts. So maybe to your point, Finn, people can't think for themselves.
You know what, Mary, it reminds me of the time that you've got these sort of like moments in life that something becomes conscious to you. At what stage do you take, the lead and actually, lead yourself into knowing, right? Into the inquiry yourself. And I think that's where, in a situation when you don't know what the details are, if you leave that and if you don't allow that to be questioned, and if you just continue the system, you're basically part of the system. It's like when you ask a question and somebody remains silent, that silence is complicit to whatever it is that's being spoken about before, right? So, yeah.
So is leadership about coming from ethics coming from the leaders? Or is it coming from the people that are working there saying, I'll accept that? I mean, which one is driving that? Or is it both hand in hand?
Because
a lot of times
both terms, they're both humans.
But
both sides are human, right?
70% of people leave the business because they don't like their manager because it's they felt like this isn't their place or what's going on. So there's a massive migration of people all the time because it doesn't fit their ethics. It doesn't fit their style, or that they're put down. Work is stolen, credit is taken, they aren't looked after. So they get up and move. And there's a massive migration of people every day. I mean, COVID's pushed it over the edge, but they left before when they had a choice because they didn't like the ethics of the company. So at what point do you let leadership work out?
I think companies have for a long time been about the push until they have to pull. So we're going to push out, this is our brand, this is our identity, this is what we're doing, here's our leadership. Until the market starts to go, we're not going to buy your products anymore, we don't believe it. And then all of a sudden they start pulling and start responding. So I think it is a two-way street,
But Nike did that recently, though. Nike did that where they turned around and said, we're going to stand for something, and people went and burnt their shoes. They stood for a percentage, but there was a kind of a feel to it that it was kind of like marketing pushing ethics rather than their actual belief on ethics.
I think it also has to do, ethics, the bigger you get and the more people you have to, I guess, satisfy, the harder it'll be. Like, my favorite saying is, you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain, right? Like, I love that. And it relates to business because as you get bigger, you eventually have to start satisfying other people. If you ever become freaking publicly listed, then you are at the mercy of a board and all these other sorts of things. And that's when I feel like this is where it's just business. Like, when you literally start saying that, or you have to say that, it's like, don't take it personally. it's just business. Like if you
But-
have
But
why
Tone,
it's
can I?
for that reason.
Tone, can I just? That's a really interesting idea, and I think there. You know, you're right. There's a dramatic difference between a small company and a large company, between a sole trader and people who are responsible for staff. And so I stood down as the chairman of a public company literally today. The announcement went out to the stock exchange that after 4 years, I'm standing down as the chair. And I can tell you that there are times where we have dealt with shareholders who did not understand why we were doing the things that we were doing, and did not necessarily agree with the things that we would. That we were saying and the direction that we were headed. But there's a point at which, you're answerable to other people, and to Finn's point earlier, which I couldn't agree with more, is, particularly when there are mouths to feed, when you have staff, you have to do the right thing by those people. But ultimately, you only look at one person in the mirror at the end of the day, and you have to do the things that you believe are right and are reasonable and are decent. And if other people don't agree or don't understand that, so be it. That's life, because you have to do what in your heart you think is the right thing to do. And if there are consequences for that, well, they can be damned, as far as I'm concerned.
I was thinking about this a lot a couple of days ago when I was reading this 50-page report on the standards for women in mills, like cotton mills in India. And it's a horrendous report. It goes into a lot of detail about health. It goes into the details about pollution. It goes into details about business, right? This whole business as usual. I'm sorry, but, we can't afford to pay you these standards that have these sort of safety circumstances for you to work. And I'm thinking, well, whose responsibility is it? Is it the girls' responsibility that come in, are working shoulder to shoulder, are breathing in the cotton dust, don't have any rights, are sleeping on the floor next to another person, shoulder to shoulder, in some sort of hostel that's been provided for them with this idea that there is something actually positive for them? And I was thinking, whose responsibility is it? Is it the parents? Is it the parents that then have to go and collect the money because they can't trust the daughter to actually collect it? Yeah, because they're so young. And, it's an incomplete system where it feels as if you can't point your finger at one person because they'll sort of shift the blame to somebody else.
But I do think it's a little bit like a tower of cards here. So, and to Mary's point and Adam's point, it's that once you say, this is what I believe in and this is who I am, and I'm willing to say no, there's no deal. I'm going to stand by
But
this.
that's when the tests come in, right?
But when you are willing to say no, that's when the whole linkage breaks, right? So when people just go, it's business, okay, it's just business. It takes someone to stand up and go, I don't believe in this, I'm not going to do it. That's when things start, the whole flow changes.
It's incredible. So in this report, right, so they actually write about how a lot of girls had actually committed suicide because of the standards and because of the pressure that's put on them. And the companies are actually asked to respond because the girls are in their care. They're living in the hostels, they're working in their factories. And the response from the factory is, yeah, we've given them all of the money that they needed to, that they were owed to in their lives. And it was their decision to do what they wanted with their lives.
That is disgusting.
Yeah, it is.
That is really, really sad. Unfathomable.
I couldn't believe it. Reading that, and I'm thinking, well, who's going to take responsibility for somebody else that is underneath your care? If that isn't a clear boundary, I don't know what is.
Yeah, actually, Tia, I was also talking to somebody this week who is, quite senior in one of the top 4 banks, and he was also sharing just from a skill standpoint. He said, on the outset, you would think that this company is really forward thinking, is into that whole adaptive leadership mindset. He said they come across like forward thinking, but he said in actual fact, behind the scenes, it's nothing but smoky mirrors. It's like I sat with next to a very senior person in the army once on the plane, and he said, when you look at a country like Western countries like the United States, he said it's a third world country with a first class coat of paint, and some of these corporations are exactly the same. It's a first class company, but really with a third class coat of paint because they don't invest in their people. And then the question is, who's supposed to invest in me? And how do I future-proof my life? How do I move forward? Do I have to find the funds to upskill myself? And you can argue, of course, you take responsibility for your life. But at what point is there that line where, we're talking about ethics here, where is that line where you actually say, well, I'm willing to go do this, but what are you willing to put into me so we can actually create something together, this notion around collaboration?
I think you're right, man. And I think that I mean, that is what has led to the rise of social innovation, social startups in the social sector. I mean, we're seeing a generational change of young people who are saying, I want to work for businesses that do good. It can't just be about making money anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I want to know that, I'm not working on a product that's doing child labor, slavery. You know, I want to know where the products are coming from. The generation the newer, younger generations have a completely different perspective and appreciation of what the production elements mean in business today, and their role in doing good or not doing good. And I think that's a great place to be.
Do you think that I mean, I hear this a lot, and I actually agree with it, but there was a counterculture in the 60s that burst out of the 50s, and they were going to change the world, and Greenpeace came out of this, and free love, and there was a percentage of people that are now boomers that started the same counterculture, and now it's happening again now with the millennials or whatever you want.
No, that's different, Matty. It's different. It's not. Listen, taking LSD and having free sex is great. I'm all for it, but at the end of the day, that's different to running an economy, right? So what we're talking about, those people were rebelling against everything. And they had a completely different world perspective. What the young people are doing is saying, no, we want to earn ours. We want to be successful entrepreneurs, and we want to build unicorn companies, but we want them to do good. And that's a fundamentally different thing. They're trying to change the system from inside the system rather than trying to change it from outside the system.
Yeah, but you look at Malcolm X, you look at the Kennedys, you look even in Australia, there was a politician that was voted out at the time. They brought in free university, Medicare, art sections, and he would turn around. There was a whole counterculture that actually was coming from that. It's very similar to what is happening now. They believed that there was going to be massive change, and it didn't. It stopped.
And then, you know what? Then you had like the Clean Air Act. You've got like so many
100%.
other factors that actually came out during that time that they will have piggybacked, right? I think there was just sort of this lag that occurred where it needed a little bit more fuel in the engine before they could actually, get excited about something again. And that's where you start to see the rise of all these tech companies, right? So there's this amazing bubble with the tech industry where it was the representation of us digitally and the digital commons and this whole sort of identity about what does it mean to be, ethical online or ethical on websites and trolling and all sorts of other standards that I think are sort of slowly coming together. But I think with the business that really shocks us into behaving good or bad, I think for a lot of people their business is something completely separate to themselves. Like, it's okay for them to lie in business, but they would never do that in their personal lives. They wouldn't do that with their family. They wouldn't do that with their friends, but they would do that in business. And I find that really fascinating that there is that segregation for themselves.
Do you think it's like online? Because people will do something behind the scene. You can't see him and he'll troll somebody, would say some terrible things that he wouldn't say to your face. There's that whole kind of hidden part. If I can get away with this and I'm not going to get caught, where's your ethics around that?
I also think that there is some sort of like piggybacking going on, right? Like, oh, look, Matty's doing this. I'm just going to also add in my little bit. Well, you know nothing about the circumstance. It's sort of like the opposite of like not saying anything and remaining silent. It's like over saying things and not really knowing the situation.
Oh, that happens so much. That's, it's one of my pet nightmares.
As we wrap up, because we're running out of time, any final thoughts? Matt, we'll start with you.
Ethics, I think, is a personal thing. You will let go the worst things if that's what you're going to do. If you stand up and you have got the ability to do, you can make great change.
Tia?
I'm really going to home in on this identity crisis that we have between the personal and the professional. There is a bridge and it's very simple to walk across.
Adam?
Just don't be a dickhead. That's my advice.
Finn?
I think as we progress, it's an interesting balancing act between commercial outcome gain and ethics and looking after people. And the bigger you grow, the more complex it becomes. And I think that the more acts, policies, procedures, guidelines that come in place that can be enforced will start to happen, and that will then help make sure that balancing act stays in balance. All I hope.
And Mary.
I think that, understanding the currency of building collaborations, an extension of yourself, and understanding that that is the long-term gain. I don't think that we're quite there yet. I don't think people understand the power of that, and understanding what that means for you and for the other individuals, and also together as 2, 3, 4 people, but also beyond that, how it impacts community. I think that's my take.
And my final thoughts are, I think the best time to implement these things, whether you're a one-person business or got 50 and planning to grow, is at the start, figure out where you as a company or as an individual are going to set those guidelines on yourself. Because then it'll be a lot easier when everyone knows what your, where that line in the sand is, even as a company. And that's it. Thank you very much.